Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm continuing my analysis into an introduction into qualitative methods research, or I can never remember it. Introduction to Methods of Qualitative Research. We're on section 1.8. This is the last part of Michel Foucault's contribution. I've done an analysis of Derrida, Spivak, Foucault. This is the last section on Foucault, that is section 1.8. It's on page 22. As you know, you can click the link in the description field. It'll take you to the PDF. Feel free to download and use it to supplement your education. And with that, let's begin. So this is an intro. This is section 1.8. Okay. So we begin with, right from the beginning, an important point, right, this key point. Linguistic structures in ontic existence. Ontic coming from ontological, so being, our existence as beings. Linguistic structures and ontic existence. And here's a quote. This quote comes from The Order of Things from Michel Foucault. What constitutes a word as a word and raises it above the level of cries and noise is the proposition concealed within it. Right? What constitutes a word as a word and elevates it above sort of just, utterances or grunts are the propositions concealed within it. So let's look at the qualitative application of this. What does this mean? Right? The variability in sociocultural interpretations of meaning for any term and the ability to account for variations among members of the linguistic community would demonstrate how variances within sociocultural life influence linguistic transformations in meaning. For example, the word fag as noun in American and British English, right, as sort of an obvious example. So let me explain what this means first. In terms of your qualitative methodology, your participants are going to be using words. Those words are going to be used within a context. And the context with which the word is used is going to inform the meaning of what's being said. Right? So this is sort of obvious. So that the idea is words in relationship, in context with other words, the meanings could change. Right? The meanings, the implications of what's being said will vary depending on the words that are used. We need to make sure that we have an understanding. I'm not going to belabor this point at all. We need to make sure that we have an understanding of what's being said by always reaffirming the context with which the word being said, what it means, right? So you can imagine that you're interviewing someone and they use the word fag, F-A-G, a lot. And you ask them about, you can imagine any narrative that would legitimize a participant's use of this word over and over. And you ask the participant, right, when you say the word fag, are you talking about a homosexual act? Well, no, I mean, when I say this, I mean that. The attempt to clarify the meaning, right? So the participant uses a word, you inquire about the use of this word. The attempt to explain the use of this word is going to identify the meaning behind the use of the word. It sounds very, very simple and trite, but that understanding, that insight, lets us, as qualitative researchers, have a greater appreciation of meaning, the complexity and meanings in the things that we say, so that most of qualitative analysis is going to occur in the vernacular that is most comfortable with the participant. If you're interviewing someone who has a high degree of education, a high degree of educational training, then your conversation might sound like this. If you're interviewing John or Jane Doe on the street, this sort of vernacular, the way in which we're speaking now, this jargon-filled, rather sort of esoteric approach to language, might disenfranchise your participant, right? So that you can't speak like this with a participant because they wouldn't understand what you mean. It's not just that we have an understanding of what our participants are saying. We need to make sure that our participants have an understanding of what we're saying. As a quick side note, this is why I do ghetto philosophy in my lectures. What is that? It's the attempt to establish an equal playing field. So I'll conceptualize some theoretical abstraction in terms of an analogy or a metaphor. We'll complicate it, and then we'll talk on a very sort of jargon-filled, esoteric level. But I won't lose or have displaced my viewers because you've been along with me along this ride. That is the discovery of some new theory, the discovery of some new concept. Similarly, in your qualitative methodologies, in your actual interviews with your participants, you want to make sure that your participant has an understanding of what you're saying. Don't go in there speaking like a heady academic unless it requires that, because you're going to disenfranchise your participant from disclosure. I feel stupid when I'm talking to this chick, when I'm talking to this dude, because I don't really know what they're saying. Right? It's a little too heady for me. Talk in a way that your participants can understand. Similarly, if your participant is speaking in a way that you're not familiar with, don't sit up there and take notes assuming that you understand what's being said, right? Member check, ask your participant, hey, by the term X, do you mean what I think you mean when you say X? No, actually I don't mean that, I mean this. Or I'm not really aware of my meaning when I say that. I never had anybody ask me what I mean when I mean fag. When I say fag, I just mean, I don't know, like a fag. Well, no, it's not there. That's not an opportunity for you to explain to the participant, no, you're wrong. This use of the term is wrong. You shouldn't be saying that. Don't you see that this? No. It might inform our understanding of discriminatory language to say that in the use of discriminatory language, some participants don't even recognize sort of the context of the language. They can't describe the meaning of the language. They just use it because they've heard others use it. They're parroting. It's called parroting. They're parroting what they've heard before without an understanding of meaning, right? So you can teach a parrot to talk English or to talk any language, I would imagine, but the parrot is only saying the utterances without a recognition of the meaning informing those words. Similarly, believe this or not, I can't tell you how many people use terms, both pejorative terms and just regular words. They know the context, they've heard the word before, they can use the word in an appropriate context and language, but if you were to ask them about the definition or what does it mean independent to the context with which they just evoked the term, so many people can't do that. Why? Because what I'm really doing is I'm parroting the context and not the meaning of the term, which is important, right? So don't want to take this too deep. If you're into semantic theory, clearly you have a better understanding of the implications of this. I don't want to get into sort of signification referent discourses now, wherein the referent might not be understood as a consequence of the signification by the participant's use, but that's going to be that's a whole nother discussion and I don't want to lose my audience. But if you understood what I just said, then you might want to focus on that, right? Sort of the semantics of our language and its relationship to epistemological insight, right? You don't necessarily need to know formal rules for grammar in order to be able to use grammar formally, right? And that fact, it would be interesting to see how that would develop in terms of a qualitative methodology. That might be more for sort of formally trained semiologists, semantic theorists and such, linguistic theorists and such. Okay, number two, direct quote, again from The Order of Things from Foucault. It is, in fact, the proposition that detaches the vocal sign, this is actually getting pretty dense, it is, in fact, the proposition that detaches the vocal sign from its immediate expressive values and establish its supreme linguistic possibility. Yikes! It's quite a bit there, right? So let's take some time and sort of unpack this because it's very dense, right? It is, in fact, the proposition that detaches the vocal sign. So a proposition, basically, the type of propositions that I'm going to use now, basically have truth functionality. That is, what's being said is either true or false with respect to some appeal. So you can imagine, I'll keep it simple. I haven't done this in a while, so might as well. And I can't draw either. So we have a nice cat with a tail, and we have a mat. And here I am, and I say, the cat is on the mat. The cat is on a mat is a proposition that applies to this existence, a cat being on a mat. This is supposed to seem like obvious and simple and trite. So the fact, it is in fact the proposition that detaches the vocal sign from its immediate expressive values. Okay, so there are any number of signs here, cat obviously being one, mat obviously being another. We have is on, to be on is our preposition, and that the idea is I have an understanding of what is based on a combination of prepositions and signs, to be technical, right? So I have the cat, I get that. We have the preposition to be on, and to be on this other sign, the mat, and the combination of these three concepts formalizes what's in my head in the world. I can verify it, sort of obviously, right? And I know this thing, the idea is, what in the world does this have to do with qualitative analysis? But I'll explain it in a second. So, in terms of this relationship then, we see that our understanding of truth, the truth of some fact, our understanding of truth is a combination of not only the words that we say, but the concepts and the signs informing our words, so that we say the word cat as an utterance, or a word, and that this utterance or word refers to the sign, the thing that we see in front of us, the cat itself. If I could draw today, it would be nice. I can't draw, sorry. So the term refers to this, and that this whole thing, this sign signification, I'll just put, this combination of the concept plus the utterance becomes, it signifies, the combination of the concept and the utterance signifies that thing in the world. So that when I say this, the cat is on the mat, it refers to that thing in the world. We see then our understanding of knowledge, our ability, and we know that knowledge is associated with power knowledge. Our understanding, our ability to know epistemologically is wedded to our language, such that if we say power knowledge is a unit, like space-time, then part of that unit is also linguistic, right? Power knowledge as a unit informs the way in which we establish and implement power in the world, the way in which we are able to transform our world and ourselves. But we can't do any of this without a recognition of its weddedness, if you will, its indebtedness to our language, right? So that language becomes critically important in establishing power in the world, right? That we exercise power for good or for bad via language, right? And any rhetorician, anyone who writes for a living, either in publications or creatively or speech writing or even something as mundane and dry as like legal writing or policy writing, know the power of the word, right? The word is very powerful, right? The ability to write in any language is the seat of really all power in controlling language in the way in which our language refers to the world. While it's too complicated for me to describe here, it's far too complicated for me to describe here, is one of many ways in which power influences and manifests itself in the world. Why? Because it's about what we say. Now, I'm not going to write this on the board, I'll just explain 2A. 3 elements of the proposition: the subject, the predicate, and sort of the links between them. This is a direct quote from Foucault. The links between them. It could be the proposition, right? It can be any number, not the proposition, the preposition, right? It can be any number of linguistic, and it's not just, I don't want you to think about this in terms of just strictly sort of subject-verb agreement and such. I'm not an English teacher. In this section, I texted my wife to find out. I was like, yeah, well, tell me a little, we had a rather nerdy text exchange on the relationship between subjects and predicates and language and such, and I'm not going to get into any of that because I'm really not trained to speak on that subject myself. So my proficiency in this technicality is intermediate at best. From a conceptual standpoint, however, we recognize that in terms of our participants disclosing their personal narratives, we're going to, and I talked about this earlier, so I'm not going to belabor the point, part of their personal narratives are going to refer to things that can be immediately verified in the world. So that they said that they were at this place at this time, and the fact that they said that they were at this place at this time on this day suggests that it was the case that they were at this place at this time on that day. A lot of what's being disclosed from our participants is going to be generalized via keeping, anonymously. We're going to keep the identity of our participants anonymously, but the content of their narrative is what's being generalized. We have an obligation as qualitative methodologists to make sure that the content of their narratives being generalized fits the facts. It is in fact truthful, what's being disclosed. We can't access the truth, much of the truth of their personal narratives, and the idea is, insofar as we generalize, we do assume some responsibility in the generalization of things that end up being false. You want to make sure, and I'm not going to get into this, you can talk to it's important that you talk specifically with your committee members for any number of instances, depending on whatever your participants' narrative might be, or just, the data that you've collected from your narrative, from the participants might be, that you have properly verified and legitimized the content of their narrative, right? That's very important. Foucault assumes a more Saussurean linguistic semiotic, which limits his analysis a bit, rather than or without reference to a more Persian semiotic. What do I mean by that? It's without. I can't believe I went that technical already. I don't feel the need to want to get that deep now. There is a sense in which part of the content of our speech doesn't refer to phenomena in the world per se, as much as it refers to icons, to codify, to images that were systematically designed to create a specific interpretation or meaning in the world, to sort of be technical. What do I mean by that? You can imagine, I don't want to use the obvious example. Let me use an example, a stop sign. It's perfect. So you can imagine, I don't have, here's some red. You can imagine that I have a stop sign. Well, I probably shouldn't even contextualize it like that. You can imagine that I have this image. Of course, I spoiled it now by saying what the image is. But I have a red octagon. And I were to ask you, I completely messed it up. Sorry, so forgive me. Imagine that I didn't say what I said. And imagine that I just drew this red octagon on the wall. I mean on this board. And I were to say to you, I want you to write the word that corresponds with this red octagon. I want you to write that word down. And I give you time to write that word down. And I would say, look at all the magic in my brain. I'm going to, it's no magic at all. I'm going to guarantee that, if you're a native English speaker and you live in a country where the signs in your country are written in English, that the word that you wrote was stop. Now, is that language? I mean, is that language? Of course it's language. Is that magic? No, of course it's not magic. There's nothing magical about what happened. I was able to determine with precision the fact that you wrote the word stop. Why? Because our understanding of this image was based on the context with which this image was fashioned to control our actions in the world. That is, there needs to be a display in neighborhoods at any number of intersections which people can see readily, so let's make it red. And when they see this object, the object isn't sort of a normal object, it's not a red circle, it's a red octagon. How many times do you even see an octagon? Even if I probably were to write this and have drawn the octagon in just black and say, well, what word comes to your head when you see this? Maybe I wouldn't have gotten so many people to write the word stop, but some of you probably would have still written stop. Why? Because the octagon is almost synonymous with stopping. Because every time we see the octagon, we know that we need to stop. It tells us to do something. Now, when it's red, without the word stop, you definitely write stop if you live in an English-speaking country where your signs are in English. Why? Because red and octagon is those two combinations. The red as being a sign, secondary quality. Octagon as being primary quality, the thing in the world. The combination of those two things mandate that we stop, and thus you write the word stop. Why is this important? We recognize, so that's sort of obvious, this is a ghetto point, to deconstruct this, to sort of dismantle this, so that we can understand this with more depth. We recognize that we can socially construct, right? This is more Persian than it is Saussurean. And you'll just have to take my word for this. I can't take the time to sort of describe this in detail. We can socially construct meaning in the world. The fact that everyone who comes to this sign stops means something, right? And that without waiver, everybody who comes to this sign stops or slows down. Whatever. You're supposed to stop. When they see this, we can socially construct behavior in the world through sign. It's through symbols and sign that we, whoever we is, the architects of social structure, obviously in this case it was a law, I would imagine, because there were car accidents and they're like, hey, we need to stop car accidents. And I think, and I'm almost positive, it's illegal to remove these signs, right? You can do some serious time for removing these signs because people don't have an identification that they ought to stop. The idea is, in terms of the regulation of behavior in society, isn't it that much easier to communicate a collective regulation of behavior through signs than it is to just say something over and over again? Hey, this is your nightly news. When I was in New York as a kid, it would come on at 10 o'clock. Hey, I'm news anchor XYZ. This is when I was a child. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? It's 10 o'clock. I haven't seen this commercial in decades. I haven't lived in New York in decades, but it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? Oh yeah, it's a reminder. Do I know? I mean, think about it though. But I do like that. There's some fondness that I have to that because the parent, him or herself, might not be thinking about the child, but the state is reminding the parent to think about your own damn kid. Hey, we, the state, are reminding you. Do you know where your kids are? Oh, that's right. Let me make sure I know where my kids are. Yeah, that's an effective way of communicating, sure. But imagine all the things that need to be communicated. Yeah, you would have non-stop, never-ending reminders, and this becomes overbearing. A far more effective way to send a reminder, to send an instruction or a mandate, is to do so with the use of signs. And these signs become iconic in some sense they're rather mundane. But the important thing is to recognize the power of sign in organizing behavior, both individually and collectively. It's very rare that I see, I've been teaching at the PhD level now for going on 5 years. This year will be next year, 2014, will begin my 5th year, which is a big deal, right? It's a big deal. To already have been in the game, you know, I can no longer, I have one more year, but then I can no longer apply for postdocs because postdocs are only good for the first 5 years out, and I'm approaching that already. Time flies. But the idea is I've been in academia a relatively short period of time, but despite the fact that it's a short period of time, it's approaching 5 years. And I haven't had one graduate student who has done research yet, and I'm in conflict resolution, I'm surprised that they haven't, on the signs and symbols of both conflict and peace. It's interesting to see that social activism is almost always in response to some sense of conflict, some sense of war, some sense of oppression or injustice, and that these social movements almost always identify the movement itself with some sign. Right? So in the last movement, really the only movement I've ever been a part of in my life, my generation hasn't really had this need, was Occupy Wall Street. And I actually have it on my wall. The V for Vendetta mask, right? That sort of anonymous mask became, of course, it was commodified, and we know all of the critique on the commodification of the social movement, blah, 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 all that other stuff. But that aside, And I did video lectures, you know, wearing the mask with the suit, because I'm ridiculous like that, because it's not about me, it's about making the point. But the idea is, if you see that image, just the image by itself, you think anonymous, you think Occupy, you think social movement, social transformance, social, sort of all that is Occupy and anonymous. That means something. That's hugely important. I think that in terms of salvaging whatever was that motivating force behind Occupy movement and behind anonymous can still be salvaged. It, you know, as much as Occupy movement was sort of, you know, it was a dud in a sense, the one thing that was and still is viable is that symbol, the anonymous mask, right? The image of that face is still viable. And people of my generation, basically any generation, when we see that now, we think, oh, Occupy was a little defunct, we think anonymous, we think, what is it, cyber hacktivist, we think hacktivism, we think, that's what we think about. And I mean, it's impossible to see that and not have some reference to that. Despite the fact that the movement might have died, despite the fact that the word associating Occupy movement with the social transformation might have finally, you know, imploded, that symbol is still viable because I'm speaking about it now, and that you have an understanding of it now, so that you can always use that symbol to start a new social movement. Now, think about how bizarre it is for us to have started here and end with that. The two are intimately connected. Believe it. The two are intimately connected, and it is, now this is a very, very hard sort of qualitative methodology to pull off because you're talking about people who get it. You got to get it first. And then you need to be, and there's thousands of people. I talk to any marketer anywhere on the planet, at any marketing firm. They get it. But the idea is it's one thing to understand this, and I would say that I understand it well. It's another thing to be able to pull it off, right? To be able to get people to galvanize a community behind an image, behind a symbol, and to actually get them to do stuff in the world behind this image, right? Behind this symbol, right? To take that which could potentially be social action and motivate that social action behind affinity with an image is powerful, but you better believe it works. You better believe it works. So the question is to understand how it works, the force with which it works, and to use that force in order to change the world, really. I mean, what else are we here to talk about? So this would be 2C, middle of page 22, qualitative application. I said I was unsure about the application at the time. I feel semantic distinctions in meaning, but not sure. This is the beauty of, you know, me just being freaking transparent as hell, is I didn't know at the time. I really didn't know, but I just gave you an application. Sometimes you have to come here and apply the lecture, and then it sparks an understanding. I know sort of in constructing and designing the lectures, the guide, but the truth of the matter is I don't ever profess to know everything. There's so much I don't know. And when I was writing the lecture, I knew that there had to be an application. I just couldn't think of it at the time. I didn't think of the Occupy movement. But while I'm talking to you, you know, it's funny because it's the first time I'm actually going to say this on camera. While I'm talking to you, I have my office and infinitely many bits of information that I can be pulling from while I'm lecturing. And you know, I talk and I look around while I'm lecturing, and I saw the Occupy mask while I was lecturing. I was like, oh, that's a perfect symbol. I didn't have that external sort of stimulus when I was writing, so I couldn't think of anything. But now, in retelling this, in explaining this, in my peripheral, I saw Occupy, and I was like, oh yeah, no, that's a great symbol. That also ties into this. So now I have an example, and I'm glad to have given you an example because it would have been very difficult. What I like about that more so than just the application to qualitative methodology is the use of external stimulus in creation of new ideas, in making sense of things that you otherwise might not have understood at the time, which is a side note. It wasn't what I intended in the lecture, but that's another good bit that I can contribute. So, moving on. Number 3, this is a quote. Quote, the verb to be is found in all propositions because we cannot say that a thing is in such a way without at the same time that it is. But this word is, which is in all propositions, is always the beginning and the basis of the attribute. It is the general and common attribute, and that is existence, right? This is why we're talking about ontic existence, right? To be is to exist. We are, we were, we went, I saw, I smelt, I felt, I had. All of this posits existence, right? Heidegger takes this and writes an entire book on to be, really, right? Heidegger does an entire discourse on Dasein, being there being, sort of existence, understanding various levels of existence. And that the idea is in our analysis, in our qualitative methodology, we need to recognize that our participants are disclosing their existence. This was who I was at this point in my life. We generalize that and we make sense of our interrelations and we make sense of our world based on those generalizations, right? So it's a coming to know one's own existence through the articulation of another person's existence. It's in articulating your existence that I better understand my own, that I better understand my own life, and it's that interplay between individuals that is sort of the human experience, right? Number 3a, Parmenides begins with this claim, it is, which is a truth of reason. It cannot even be denied without self-contradiction. If you say it is not, that is, nothing exists, top of page 23, then you've proven that it is. For if nothing exists, it's not nothing, rather, it is something, since nothing cannot be without, this sounds so philosophical, right? Since nothing cannot be without thinking of it as something, there is nothing. There is only being, right? It's contradictory to even talk about nothing, because insofar as you conceptualize it, you talk about it, you put it into existence. But you can't put nothing into it and on and on and on, right? If this was a philosophy course, I would spend more time talking about that. This is not a philosophy course, this is a qualitative analysis course. So how does this apply? When people talk about their narratives, about their personal experience, when you challenge them or when you ask them to make sense of things that they disclosed that you might not understand, they might not have an ability to make sense, and that's fine. You know, I don't know why I said that, or I don't know why I did that, or I can't really offer you a clear articulation or interpretation of the meaning of this phenomena in my life. And that's okay. The idea is at that moment to ask if, right, it's okay, to ask if your interpretation of their lived experience holds true to what they went through. You know, I sense that based on what you've disclosed, that this was a point in your life where you were really confused and you didn't understand, Am I correct in that assessment? Is that an accurate representation, sort of the way in which you word this? Is that an accurate representation of what you might have felt at that time? Actually, yeah, it is. The fact that you got the participant to verify and validate your interpretation, you have now co-created the explanatory model with which you are then going to generalize your findings. Why is this important? Because it's something. There's something there. As small and as insignificant as it is not up to you, it's not even up to the participant to determine what becomes profound. Profundity for the diversity of human experience might rest in the most mundane, boring, trivial fact of his or her existence. In my lecture series, why I keep doing these series is just the same thing that happens to me in writing or in reading. I'll read a page, Mary reads a page, Bob reads a page, we're all reading the same pages. And the instructor says, highlight those things on the page that jump out to you, the most important elements on this page, and highlight those things. So I go through, I read, I highlight the things that are important to me. Mary reads, Bob reads, all the same page, all verbatim, all exactly the same text. It's impossible that we all highlighted exactly the same thing in exactly the same sections. Yeah, there might be sections where we have highlighted the same thing, but not the exact same. I mean, that would be bizarre if that happened. Right? There's going to be emphasis that Mary's going to place on some things in the text that I didn't emphasize. And the same thing with Bob in relationship to her and I. The reason why we generalize, for example, this video lecture is me generalizing my research. It's not really research per se, but I do this on your behalf. but me generalizing my reading. I do this because I recognize, an hour 25 minutes, that wasn't so good. What he said was okay, but for me it was an hour 26 minutes when he said that stuck out, right? It was that I found important. Whereas someone else might say just the opposite. So that the idea is me contributing this information, me regurgitating, reinterpreting this information, doing the reading, filtering the reading through my personal life, disclosing this hour after hour after hour after hour to you. I'm doing it because I recognize that there is a plethora of interpretational predispositions. There's a plethora of ways in which the content of what I'm describing and explaining will be applied, and there is no one proper interpretation or application. Thus, what for you might be boring in one aspect of the lecture might have meaning for another individual at exactly the same point, in exactly the same time of the lecture, and the idea is not to force a homogeneous interpretation on my own lecture. This work transcends even my own effort. So I might think that this was the most important element of my lecture, but I would never say that, right? It's up to you to determine what's important. It's up to you to determine what aspects you're going to keep and what aspects you're going to discard in your own research. Similarly, if that makes sense, and it should make sense to you, it's up to your participant to disclose, but the interpretation isn't unique to even your own participant. Yes, it's his life. Yes, it's her life. Yes, it's his or her experiences, and they can share the interpretation. You can validate that that was important for you, sure. But you know what, Mary? For me, what I found interesting about your narrative, about your disclosure was this. Oh, that didn't really mean anything to me, but it did for me. It really stood out to me. It was that aspect of your experience. It was the fact that this and this happened and you did that and that for me, it's something that's going to stick with me, and I want to also generalize those findings, right? So I mean, and this should be obvious, I mean, interpretation can't be fixed. The attempt to try and fix interpretation is probably one of the sources of all conflict. Why? Because human beings are going to experience the world in different ways, and insofar as we experience the world in different ways, there are better and worse interpretations, but the idea to mandate one uniform interpretation is going to be sort of a guaranteed source for conflict because of the diversity of our experiences. So, B, this is 3B, top of page 23. Qualitative application, cultural distinctions in articulation of being. For example, personhood in the West assumes a given, whereas in other parts of the world, personhood and the linguistic reference to such an idea is conferred. I did part of my graduate studies in Africana history and Africana studies, Africana religious practices, and it was interesting. I GA'd for a while with a professor who taught this material, and I thought it was interesting that in some countries and in some traditional practices on the continent, it was understood that personhood was conferred, that you were part of the community, that you were part of the society, but in order to be identified and to have the rights of personhood, there was initiatory practice, or there were certain contributions that had to be made to the greater social good in order for personhood to be conferred. So it's important to recognize, and this might be a presupposition on Foucault's part because of his cultural affiliation being Western, that personhood exists as such. The idea is that there is flexibility in this concept of personhood. I don't want to sort of go into that discussion. Insofar as some cultures, that idea of the benefits and the merit of being identified as person isn't something that you get just because you're born and alive. There are many cultures in the world, not just in sort of diverse African cultures, in which personhood is conferred. And it's conferred as a consequence of having facilitated some ends, having performed some initiatory practice, and But the idea that personhood could be conferred and thus also denied is profoundly interesting. In terms of a qualitative methodology, I mean, think about that. I would love to read that, right? I came from a culture in which personhood was conferred, and I did not receive the conferral of personhood. She did not receive the conferral of personhood, and here's what that meant for us. Or I did receive it, and here's what that meant for me. Can you imagine what it must have been like for an individual to have failed in attaining personal identification, personhood, from a collective group of others, his or her peers, his or her social nexus? I can't imagine what that must have, I can't even imagine what that must have felt like, what that must be. Having an understanding of the pros and the cons of both Eastern and Western conceptions of personhood via qualitative methodology, I think would be enormously beneficial qualitative research. You could probably get, I mean, UN is a bit of a stretch, but, you know, I would imagine that this is the stuff the United Nations is interested in, right? This is like really big international macro level, probably funded research. Why? Because it necessitates distinctions in that concept, right? Which must, if you have a distinct understanding of what personhood means in one context, in one culture, that means your cultural practices based on that concept are going to change, right? The way in which we treat people are going to change. Why? Because our concept of what it is to be a person is distinctly different from your concept, right? And you can imagine that interstate conflict might unfold, might be exacerbated if you really take the time to do the reduction, might be exacerbated because of competing conceptions or distinct conceptions of personhood. And having an understanding of how culture A versus culture B conceptualizes what it means, what it is to be a person. Extremely difficult research to pull off because of the cultural distinctions and the distinctions in linguistic, differences in language, which would, I think, necessitate sort of NGO-based, international consortium-based motivation. This probably would require like big funding in order to pull it off. It would be hard to pull off as an individual student, but it would be a hotbed for good qualitative analysis, right? Sort of an I'd fund it if I had money to fund it. So that is this idea of personhood and the cultural distinctions in which it is operationalized and practiced is huge. Is huge for qualitative research. And then lastly, for the last bit in Foucault's discourse, and to conclude section 1.8, number 4, this is the middle of page 23. This linguistic structure is the ultimate foundation for epistemic accessibility to our ontic existence. It's the way in which we understand our existence by how we define who it is we are. It's the way in which we understand who we are, what we do, the contributions that we make, our broader relationship to others by the way in which we articulate self. 4C, I guess it's supposed to be A, but 4C, utterances are transformed into meaning if articulated as propositions. I described that. D, all propositions depend on the function of the verb to be, that is the ontic existence, and the relational aspect of subject, predicate, and the link. And I explained that. Sort of the way in which I define any number of things in the world, the way in which I see the world, what my experiences were of the world, relate to things that could potentially be verified. I could potentially have access to it. The problem is, and this is an inescapable problem in terms of qualitative methodologies, is that not all aspects of the person's disclosed life experience will be readily empirically verifiable. So you do need to establish a decorum, a forum in which the participant can trust, and you can trust that what's being disclosed is in fact representational of his or her life experience. And then lastly, number 4, language establishes, and this is a direct quote, the homogeneous order of grammatical functions. And this is important. The systematic organization of function establishes homogeneous order. What does that mean? We get, as qualitative methodologists, we get what I think is a huge privilege in terms of social functioning. Part of the functioning of society, no matter where you live, anywhere on the globe, is articulating the way in which we, as people, make sense of our surroundings. how we make sense of our relationship to ethics, the business community, the political order, our religious communities, our families, our society and such, right? It's imperative to recognize that since so much of our existence is determined by social construction, and it changes with the times, such that interracial dating was, it probably was a sin. I don't really know. I probably shouldn't do religious bits, but it might have been a sin in the past. It definitely was illegal in the past. It was frowned upon in the past, is a triviality, is mundane in the present. And the transformation that society took from it being immoral, illegal, to it being just an everyday, boring phenomenon is a consequence of social construction. That transformation was indebted to theorists like Michel Foucault and many others, and not just interracial, more, the way in which we look at homosexuality and homosexual acts. I can imagine people never would have believed a day would come in which homosexuals and homosexual identity would have freed itself from the shame associated with being homosexual and being identified as a homosexual. That it would never have been, it couldn't have ever been conceptualized that the day would have come where someone would say, hey, I'm a news anchor and I'm doing the nightly news prime time and I'm gay. That person could have ever have gained a respectable position in society, because to be gay was to be the most debased individual possible. And now, you're not. You're regarded with preeminence and prestige. How is it that it changed? It changed because people like you and me told the stories of those who were victimized and demonized, and we established theoretical frameworks which we could generalize to those who weren't gay, and build the symmetry between members in the LGBTI community, members in the African American. This is the whole abolitionist movement, right? The whole part of the whole abolitionist movement was to record the stories, good white people recording the stories of black people who couldn't write for themselves or read for themselves. And insofar as those narratives were recorded and generalized to the population of whites, I was able to see myself in their narratives. So yeah, this might seem like it's all fluff, and this is all, qualitative methodology isn't serious, and qualitative methodology is all feel good, feel lucky, happy-go-lucky, da-da-da-da, everybody sitting around talking, and, this is the stuff that changes the world. This is the force. Having mastery of this tool, qualitative methodology, having an ability to take the general discussions of people's lives, day-to-day, boring, lived experience, and to find the thread of humanity in their personal narratives that can be generalized to a larger community, creates the forum for sympathy. It creates the forum for empathy. It creates a forum for shared recognition. It creates the very nexus with which the next wave of inclusion will come. And this takes centuries. I mean, it took a long time to get from civil rights movement to where we are now, and you better believe there's still more that has to be done. So I mean, these fights, this sort of social movement takes generations, 2, 3, 4 generations it'll take. It might take as much as a century or centuries. But the idea is because I know sometimes graduate students get discouraged because they think, this isn't quantitative studies. I'm not doing mathematical or statistical analysis, and that stuff is the real stuff. This stuff is wishy-washy and fake, and this stuff is just, this isn't meaningful. That's absolutely false. There's power, tremendous power, in developing an ability to allow individuals the comfort, the trust, to disclose their personal stories to you, and you having earned the respect of the community of participants, and maybe even a larger community, so that they can know you're a trustworthy person. I can come to this person to disclose my stories. Why? Because I know this person is going to generalize my stuff and change the world. If you do that well, you transform your dissertation into a book, that book gains social appeal because you were the type of person who could find in someone's rather boring, pedestrian, banal life story that thread of human experience that other people could latch onto. Oh my goodness, forget it. You're going to be in demand. You're going to be in demand. Why? Because social transformation is built on stories. It's built on stories. Social transformation is built on stories. So there's always significance in this research. Don't knock yourself at all, right? And don't lose hope and don't get discouraged by sort of the flexibility of this field. And don't think that you cannot establish order. You can establish order. But it's up to you to determine. This is via grounded theory. You can watch my whole lecture series on that. It's up to you to be insightful enough and flexible enough and open enough so that people will feel the need to disclose more to you, take what they've disclosed and change the world for it and make the world that much better. With that, this concludes my section on Michel Foucault. I'm going to spend the entirety of the rest of the lecture series on Judith Butler, who is quickly becoming one of my new favorites. And I'm going to talk about Butler's account and how we can use and implement Judith Butler's approach to conceptual thinking, critical thinking, to your qualitative methodology. But that will begin in the next section. With that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.